Alright, so let me tell you about the time a real estate developer thought he could just borrow my driveway while I was deployed overseas and accidentally destroyed his own multi-million-dollar housing project in the process. Yeah, I wish I was exaggerating. But this whole thing started with something that seemed small at first, one bulldozer, parked in the wrong place. See, I bought my house back in 2019, just outside a small town in Oregon, not the trendy Portland side. I mean the quiet side where the roads turn to gravel and the trees get thick enough to swallow sound. The place sits at the very end of a narrow dirt road, the kind where if two trucks meet, somebody's got to back up. No traffic, no streetlights, just tall fir trees and this little creek that runs behind the property like it's trying to keep a secret. And honestly, that's exactly why I bought it. After years in the army, deployments, bases, constant noise, I wanted quiet. I wanted mornings where the loudest thing around was a woodpecker losing his mind on a tree somewhere. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and the land next to mine, about 15 acres, was untouched woodland. Deer cut through it every morning like they owned the place. It was peaceful, until a guy named Trevor Halstead bought the woods next door. Now, Trevor was the kind of man you can size up in about 10 seconds. Sunglasses even when it's cloudy, expensive boots that had clearly never seen mud, and a voice that carried just a little too far, like he expected the world to be listening. The first time I met him, I was grabbing my mail, and he was standing by the road talking on his phone, pacing back and forth like he was rehearsing for a movie. Maximize lot yield. Yeah, 14 units easy. Gated entrance maybe. He noticed me watching and covered the phone. Hey there, he said with this confident little smile. You live down here? I nodded. Just bought the land next door, he said. Going to turn it into something nice. Something nice. That's always the phrase developers use right before they bulldoze half a forest. I asked him what he meant. Oh, luxury woodland community, he said casually. Private road, streetlights, probably 14 homes. Big ones. 14 homes. On land that had been nothing but trees for decades. I told him honestly. I kind of liked it the way it was. Trevor laughed. Not mean exactly. Just that dismissive laugh people use when they've already decided your opinion doesn't matter. Trust me, he said. This area is going to look a lot better when we're done. Then he went right back to his phone call like I was part of the scenery. That should have been my first warning. 2 months later, construction started. At first, it stayed deep in his property. Chainsaws, logging trucks, the distant growl of heavy equipment. Annoying, sure, but technically legal. It was his land. Trees started disappearing, though. Whole sections of forest cleared out like someone took a giant eraser to the landscape. Every time I drove past, Trevor's crew was expanding further. But still not my problem. Or at least I thought it wasn't. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I came home from work, turned down my gravel road like usual, and about 20 yards from my driveway, I had to slam the brakes. Because sitting right across the entrance to my property was a bulldozer. Not beside the driveway. Not near it. Across it. The blade was pressed into the gravel like someone had deliberately planted it there. The tracks ran straight across my property line, and one of my wooden fence posts was leaning sideways like it had just lost a bar fight. I just sat there in my truck for a minute staring at it. Like, surely this is temporary. Surely someone's about to move it. Nope. A construction worker walked over wiping dust off his gloves. You trying to get through? He asked. I looked at him. Yeah, that's my driveway. He shrugged like this happened all the time. You can park down the road for now. For now? That phrase landed weird. For now? I asked. Yeah, he said, pointing toward the construction site. Boss said this is part of the access easement. Access easement. That phrase hit my brain like a brick. Excuse me. I said. The easement, he repeated. We're using this entrance for construction traffic. I stared at him. There is no easement on my property. He shrugged again. Talked to Trevor. Then he just walked away like the conversation was over. So there I was, staring at a bulldozer blocking my driveway, groceries melting in the back seat. I ended up parking half a mile down the road and carrying 2 bags at a time through the trees just to get home. And the whole walk back, I kept thinking the same thing. This doesn't make sense. That night, I pulled out my home purchase documents, closing paperwork, property survey, everything. I read every page. No easement. None. Just to be sure, I logged into the county land records database and pulled up the official parcel map. Still nothing. No right-of-way. No shared access agreement. Nothing filed. Which meant one thing. Trevor had told his crew they could use my driveway, even though legally they had zero permission to do it. The next morning I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. So I called the county planning office instead. And that's when things started getting interesting. Because according to the county records, Trevor's development had been approved with a secondary emergency access road requirement. Basically fire code stuff. Large subdivisions need two ways in and out so emergency vehicles don't get trapped if one road is blocked. Makes sense. The problem? On the paperwork Trevor submitted to the county, he had signed sworn documents claiming he had temporary legal access through my property, my driveway. He told the county it was already secured, which was news to me. Even worse, when I walked back outside and actually looked carefully at the gravel near my driveway entrance, I realized something. The bulldozer wasn't the only thing on my land. They had already dumped a strip of fresh gravel extending about 15 feet past the boundary marker. They were literally building their construction road onto my property. At that moment, something clicked in my brain. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Trevor hadn't accidentally blocked my driveway. He had planned to use it. Without asking. Without permission. Without even telling me. And honestly, that's the moment this whole thing stopped being annoying and started becoming personal. Because one thing about guys like Trevor, they tend to assume the same thing every time. That a single homeowner won't fight back. They assume you'll complain, maybe threaten a lawyer, but eventually you'll get tired and let it go. But here's the funny part. While Trevor was busy building his luxury neighborhood, he had no idea the one person standing between him and that project had just come back from years of Army deployments. And I am very, very patient when it comes to solving problems. So instead of yelling at his workers, instead of confronting him in the street, I started gathering evidence. Photos, videos, drone footage showing the property markers. Because if Trevor thought parking one bulldozer on my driveway was going to make me give up, he was about to learn something very expensive about property law, and he still had no idea what was coming. Now, before I tell you what happened next, we've got to pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people misunderstand how property disputes like this actually work. And trust me, Trevor was definitely counting on that misunderstanding. See, when most people hear the word easement, they assume it's some vague handshake agreement, like neighbors just letting each other pass through land whenever it's convenient. But according to standard procedure, that's not how it works in the United States. An easement is a legal property right, and those things don't appear out of thin air. They have to be formally recorded with the county, attached to the deed, and clearly defined on survey maps. If it's not in the records, it basically doesn't exist. No paperwork, no easement. Simple as that. Now here's where things get more serious. From a legal perspective, what Trevor did wasn't just a neighborly misunderstanding. If someone tells a county planning department that they have legal access to a piece of land, and they sign that statement under oath, that becomes part of a regulatory approval process. If that statement turns out to be false, you're not just dealing with trespassing anymore. You're dealing with fraudulent representation to a government agency. And that's a whole different level of problem. But here's the part a lot of developers quietly rely on, what I call the psychological trap. This is a psychological trap. They move fast. They bring in heavy equipment. They start construction immediately. The idea is that by the time the homeowner reacts, the project already has momentum, permits, contractors, investors, buyers. And suddenly the lone homeowner feels outnumbered. People start saying things like, "Don't make a big deal out of it. It's probably temporary. Just let them finish." And that pressure works more often than you'd think. Because fighting a development project sounds exhausting. Lawyers, courts, time, money. Most people decide it's easier to just tolerate it. But Trevor made one critical mistake. He assumed I was going to panic, argue, maybe threaten a lawsuit, instead of doing the one thing that actually matters in these situations. Document everything. Because once you have proof, clear boundaries, recorded deeds, evidence of false filings, the entire power dynamic flips. And the developer who thought he controlled the situation suddenly has to start explaining things to the county, which is exactly where Trevor's problems were about to begin. So once I realized what Trevor had done, I stopped thinking like a frustrated neighbor and started thinking like someone building a case. First thing I did the next morning was walk the property line with my phone. I filmed everything. The gravel they dumped past the boundary marker, the bulldozer tracks cutting across my land, the fence post they knocked sideways. even the orange survey flags that clearly showed where his property ended and mine began. Then I flew my little drone over the area and got aerial footage. From above, it was even clearer. You could literally see his construction road bending off his property and sliding right into my driveway like it belonged there, which it absolutely did not. After that, I made one more phone call, not to Trevor, to a property attorney in town named Laura Whitaker. Now, Laura had the kind of calm voice that makes you feel like she's already 10 steps ahead of whatever problem you're bringing her. I sent her the footage, the parcel maps, the county approval documents Trevor had filed. She didn't say much while reviewing everything, just a lot of quiet keyboard clicking. Then after a few minutes she goes, "Okay, wow." Never a phrase you hear from a lawyer unless something is seriously wrong. "What?" I asked. "Well," she said slowly, "this isn't just trespassing." I could hear her scrolling through the documents. "He signed sworn paperwork claiming he had secured legal access through your driveway. The county approved his development based on that statement." She paused. "And unless you forgot to sign something, that statement appears to be false." I laughed a little. "Oh, I definitely didn't sign anything." Another pause. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Good. Because that means we have leverage." Within 24 hours, Laura sent Trevor's company a formal cease and desist letter. Basically legal language for, "Stop using this property immediately or things get expensive very quickly." We also included the evidence, photos, drone footage, the survey map, the county records showing no easement existed. Trevor didn't respond. Instead, one of his project managers called Laura the next day, sounding irritated. "Yeah, this is probably just a miscommunication," the guy said. "We'll move the bulldozer soon." Soon. There's that word again. Laura asked him one simple question. Define soon. Silence. Then he tried to brush it off. "Look, construction schedules are complicated. We're working on it." That was enough for her. Because here's the thing. Once someone has already made a false legal statement to obtain permits, delay is not your friend. Momentum is. So Laura filed something called an emergency injunction with the county court. And if you've never heard of that before, here's the short version. It's basically the legal equivalent of slamming a giant red stop button on a project. If the judge believes there's credible evidence of unlawful activity, they can freeze construction until the issue is resolved. 48 hours later, that's exactly what happened. Every piece of equipment on Trevor's site had to shut down. Excavators parked. Logging stopped. Trucks stopped moving. The entire development just froze. Now that alone would have been painful for him. Construction delays burn money like gasoline. But the real trouble started when the county planning department looked at the injunction paperwork. Because Laura included something very important. The signed approval documents Trevor had filed claiming access to my driveway. Once the county saw those, they opened an investigation. And suddenly Trevor wasn't just dealing with an annoyed homeowner. He was dealing with county regulators asking very uncomfortable questions. About a week later, I got a letter inviting me to attend a planning commission meeting. Apparently, the situation had escalated enough that they wanted it discussed publicly. So that evening, I drove into town and sat in this big government meeting room with about 30 other people. County officials, planning staff, a few curious locals, and something else I didn't expect. Future buyers. Turns out several families had already placed deposits on homes in Trevor's planned neighborhood. And they were not thrilled to hear construction had suddenly stopped. Trevor showed up too. First time I'd seen him since the bulldozer incident. He looked less confident than before. No sunglasses this time. Just a stack of papers and a lawyer sitting next to him. When the meeting started, the planning director explained the issue to the room. During review of recent filings, he said, "We discovered discrepancies regarding the secondary emergency access route required for this development." Then he looked at Trevor. "Mr. Halstead, your application states that temporary access was secured through the neighboring property." Trevor cleared his throat. "Yes, that's correct." The director nodded toward me. "The owner of that property has submitted documentation stating no such agreement exists." The room went quiet. Trevor's lawyer leaned over and whispered something to him. Trevor adjusted in his chair. "Well, there may have been some miscommunication," he said. Miscommunication. That word again. But then the fire marshal spoke up. And this is where everything really started collapsing. According to county fire code, he said, subdivisions with more than 10 homes must have 2 separate emergency access points. He tapped the site map projected on the screen. If this driveway access does not exist, he paused, then the project currently has only one entry road. Another pause. That means it does not meet fire safety requirements. You could almost hear the oxygen leave the room. One of the future buyers raised his hand. Wait, are you saying the development can't be built? The fire marshal didn't sugarcoat it. No secondary access, no permits. Trevor's lawyer immediately jumped in. We're working to resolve the access issue. But the planning director cut him off. With respect, you stated in signed documents that access was already secured. He tapped the paperwork. Those statements were used to approve the development. Now people in the audience were whispering. The buyers looked angry. And Trevor, he just sat there staring at the table. The commission took a short recess to review the investigation findings. When they came back, the decision was quick. Because once the access claim was proven false, the entire approval process was compromised. The chairman read the ruling out loud. Due to misrepresentation in the submitted application and failure to meet emergency access requirements. He glanced at Trevor. The development approval is hereby revoked. Just like that. 14 luxury homes. Gone. Trevor tried to appeal, of course. Developers always do. But once the county investigation became public record, things started unraveling fast. Banks don't like financing projects wrapped in legal disputes. Investors don't like uncertainty. Within a few weeks, Trevor's lenders started pulling out. Construction never restarted. 6 months later, I drove past the property and saw foreclosure notices stapled to a wooden post near the entrance. The half-cleared land sat there abandoned. Weeds growing through the gravel road they had poured across my driveway. Eventually, the bank auctioned the land off to a regional land conservation group. They started restoring the forest along the boundary line, planting trees, rebuilding the habitat that had been cleared, and slowly, the woods started coming back. Sometimes in the evening, I sit on my porch and look out at that stretch of forest that almost became a luxury subdivision. And I still think about that first moment. The bulldozer parked across my driveway like it owned the place. Trevor thought he could pressure one homeowner into staying quiet. Instead, he accidentally destroyed his own project. All because of one lie. About an easement. So now that the dust has settled, the trees have started growing back, and the bulldozers are long gone. People ask me the same question all the time. Was it worth it? And I get why they ask. Because from the outside, it probably looked like a pretty big fight over something that seemed small. A driveway, some gravel, a temporary construction access point. But the lesson here is, it was never really about the driveway. It was about the assumption behind it. The assumption that if a big project pushes hard enough, the small property owner will eventually fold. And honestly, that assumption works a lot of the time. Developers move fast. They bring in equipment, crews, contracts, investors. Suddenly there's momentum, and that momentum creates pressure. The lone homeowner starts hearing things like, "Don't make trouble," or "You're holding up progress," or my personal favorite, "This is just temporary." But here's the thing. Temporary has a funny way of becoming permanent if nobody challenges it. From a legal perspective, property law in the U.S. is actually very clear about this. Boundaries matter. Recorded documents matter. If an easement exists, it must be documented, surveyed, and attached to the deed. No paperwork, no easement. Simple. But here's where things get interesting. A lot of people think the biggest power in these situations belongs to whoever has the most money or equipment. That's not always true. According to standard procedure, the real power often sits inside the paper trail. Permits, filings, sworn statements, regulatory approvals. If someone builds their entire project on top of one false assumption in those documents, that project becomes incredibly fragile. One small crack in the paperwork can bring the entire structure down. And that's exactly what happened here. Now, there's another layer to this story that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's the human psychology behind these conflicts. Because what Trevor tried to do follows a pretty classic pattern. This is a psychological trap. You start by acting like the decision is already made. You move equipment onto the property, start construction, make everything feel inevitable. The homeowner suddenly feels like the odd one out, like they're the unreasonable person standing in the way of progress. It's subtle pressure, not outright threats, just momentum. And momentum can be incredibly persuasive. But momentum only works if the other person panics. If you slow down, start documenting things, and follow the actual process, that momentum disappears pretty quickly. And that's really the lesson here. Not revenge, not winning, just understanding the rules of the game. Because once you understand the rules, situations that feel overwhelming suddenly become manageable. Now I'll be honest, I didn't go into this trying to destroy anyone's development project. If Trevor had walked over that first day and said something like, "Hey, we need temporary access for a week. Can we work something out?" The conversation probably would have gone very differently. Neighbors solve problems like that all the time. But instead he tried to skip the conversation entirely and just declare access like it was already his. And that's where everything went wrong. Because once you put something false into official documents, you're no longer just dealing with a neighbor dispute. You're dealing with regulators, investigators, public records, systems that don't care about confidence or bulldozers or construction schedules. They care about accuracy. And accuracy is a brutal referee. So now the land next to my house is quiet again. The conservation group planted hundreds of young trees along the boundary. Deer started coming back last winter. The creek behind the property sounds the way it used to, just water moving through rocks. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evening and look out at those woods and think about how close they came to disappearing. All because someone believed one very common idea, that a single homeowner doesn't have any real power. Turns out, that assumption can be pretty expensive. But now I'm curious about something. If you came home one day and found a bulldozer parked across your driveway, and a developer claiming they had legal access to your land, what would you do? Would you fight it? Would you try to negotiate? Or would you just decide it wasn't worth the headache? I'm genuinely interested to hear how other people would handle it, because situations like this happen more often than most people realize. So let me know what you think.